Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag where I answer your questions, hot takes, observations, and ultimately your comments about tennis or anything else. Posted on the YouTube community tab. You left your comments there, as well as my Discord server. Link to that is in the description. We are back. 2025 is here. Happy New Year, everybody. What timing for the first real regular mailbag of the year. I know I did the coach's mailbag last week, but a regular mailbag. It is good to be back. I hope everybody's 2024 was great. I hope 2025 is even better, happier, healthier. And as you know, it's funny because as a tennis person, I sort of reflect on the year once the season ends. And I feel like I have two New Years, so to speak. But I'll say it again. I think I said it Monday Match Analysis Awards. I can't say it enough, though. I so appreciate everybody who watches, listens, supports, and it fills my life with great joy. So thank you. Now, on a more negative note, comments were a little bit lower than I normally see. I don't know if it's because we're out of the routine. I don't know if it's because the YouTube algorithm just didn't put the community post out for everybody to see like normal. But just want to reiterate, YouTube community tab on the homepage of my channel. Find that. We'll be going back to every week. Discord is 24/7. And leave an Apple Podcast review with a mailbag comment, and I will get to that as well, which is a great way to leave a mailbag comment. Helps me in multiple ways. So that said, there's plenty to get into. There is enough here. So let's just jump right in. Not lacking comments ever, but there were a lot less than there usually are this week. First one is a big one from anonymous tennis follower. Hi, Gil. When I was doing my top 10 predictions for the WTA, I came across some questions worth pondering and would like to hear your thoughts on them. 1, who would have a better season, Swiatek or Sabalenka? And 2, who would have a better season, Goff or Rybakina? Let me read. This comment goes on and asks another question. Let me read it after I answer the first part. Great questions. And I'm with you. I think those are the tiers, right? So those are the decisions that you have to make. And it's a funny thing because if everything goes perfectly for Iga and Wim Fizette, her new coach, meaning all of the untapped potential that I believe exists with Swiatek is fulfilled. And the things that I think she can add, the things that I think she can do even better, despite all the success she has, if all of that sort of develops in the most positive way, I think Iga is going to be number one again. But all of that is an if. I think there are more question marks there. There's a little bit more uncertainty. My answer is Sabalenka. I have Sabalenka finishing 2025 number one. I think she's going to have the best year of her career, even better than last year. Despite the fact that I think Swiatek has more room to grow compared to Sabalenka. For me, Aryna is just a little bit more of a sure bet. I trust her in so many ways now where there's a certainty and a clear-headedness in what she's trying to do tactically. Her targets are so much better now, and that's where she's just cut the inconsistency out of her game. She's feeling court position pretty well, and she's using her touch sometimes. I actually called her first match of the year, and she was playing Zarazua, and was pretty upset with herself because her drop shot wasn't working. So much so that she kept trying to hit it in the second set. It wasn't a very competitive match, so I think she knew she had things under control. And I think her main focus was like, can I hit a damn drop shot? Because they kept landing too deep. The fact that I'm even saying that about Sabalenka is nuts, because it wasn't until she was injured in a match during the clay court season against Svitolina, and because she was injured, I think she was like, let me just try something, and started hitting drop shots. It wasn't even a part of her game until that match against Svitolina. And now she's using it and kind of taking court position when there's easy opportunities to do so, and volleying short and all that good stuff. And as far as the second serve goes, I think saying she stopped double faulting undersells her. I don't think that's paying her second serve enough respect, because it is one of the best second serves in the world. As heavy as you'll really see on the WTA Tour, as fast as you'll see on the tour. It's got kick, it's got speed, it's hard to attack. And so many players on the women's side kind of make a living on being offensive off that second return, and you can't really do that against Sabalenka because her second serve is stellar. So just saying she stopped double faulting isn't enough. The other thing I want to point out about last year for Aryna is not everything went smoothly. There was some bad luck, and you could even say some tragic bad luck. I think if you look at what happened mentally and emotionally for her in March with her ex-boyfriend passing away, that clearly affected her for a while. And she talked later in the season about how she wished she handled it better. She wished she took a break from playing. She tried to play through it. That's how she tried to cope. It wasn't very effective or healthy for her, and it was a regret that she had looking back on the year. Look at the results at that time of the season. She wasn't really herself at that time. And then she had the shoulder injury and missed Wimbledon. And Wimbledon is a tournament that I think she will win at some point. Maybe this year. She might be my favorite. So she missed one of the slams with an injury. She has not shown to be very injury prone. She had that really tragic thing in March. You know, she could have a smoother ride in 2025, presumably. All right. Now, Iga, I think she started serving big, but there's still so much more progress that she can make with her accuracy on the serve. I think tactically she can be way more malleable. I've talked about this. I want her to kind of utilize deeper positioning sometimes. I think it would really help her. We'll see if that's something that Wim Fizet agrees with. But the biggest thing is the mentality. The biggest thing is that Iga has had a pattern recently outside of Roland Garros of allowing the anxiety of a slam getting to her, and then ultimately she ends up playing worse at a major. That's the biggest thing for her next year that I think she wants to figure out. So there's a lot more room there for her to grow, in my opinion. I'm just not, and I think a lot of it can happen, but there's more question marks there. So higher ceiling, more questions. I'm going to go Sabalenka at number 1. Another thing I can say about Aryna, a little bit different than Iga, who I think can struggle with the pressure and the anxiety. Sabalenka, and I know there's been a lot of choking in her career. There's no doubt about that. I think recently she has a great way about her as far as just being downstream throughout the year. So she's not really burning out, so to speak. And she seems like she enjoys herself and the process, whether it be on the practice court or out to dinner with her team. I think that's a pretty big asset for Sabalenka as well. I won't go as long on Gauff versus Rybakina. I don't feel as strongly about that one. I think it's really, really tough to answer. But I am kind of pumped about Rybakina Ivanisevic. I think it's going to work. And if Rybakina cuts out some of the weird durability stuff with illness and just missing a lot of tournaments, and I think just sometimes mentally not being there, like if she locks down physically and mentally, which is what I think Ivanisevic is mostly going to help her do, I just think the potential there with the foundation of her game, the movement is never going to be to the level of the other three, but I think the ball striking and the serve and the return can carry her so far. I think it's going to be, I've Rybakina number 3 for those reasons. Now, Gauff, if you're buying into what she did after the U.S. Open last year, and there was a lot to love there with how she was playing. I try to not change my opinion of a player after the U.S. Open. You guys know that. So I'm a little bit pinch of salt with all the stuff that Gauff did after the U.S. Open last year. And I think ultimately, in terms of where she can get better, where she can take the next leap in her game, cutting down the double faults, which there were, the numbers the numbers suggest that they are still like, there's a lot of potential for Coco to get a few more percentage points out of her game by just limiting the double faults a little bit more. And obviously the forehand in certain situations, not helping her out. The one thing I'll say about this, and it's not that I think Coco is doomed and she can never get better in these areas, but I also acknowledge, like, we've been talking about this stuff for a lot of years now, and sometimes weaknesses just stay weaknesses. So I think Coco has a tougher task in front of her as far as making those technical gains versus Rybakina. I just think the new environment and the new team might be a pretty low resistance path to finding a better mentality and finding more consistent health as she goes about her year. All right. Now, the other part to this question is on a somewhat related side note. When a player hires a new coach, how does that affect your prediction for their ranking next year? We saw how sometimes these new coaching hires can be a miss. Example, Runa with Becker and Luthi. Well, look, it depends on the situation, right? The coach, the player. I think on the men's side, you heard that in my top 10 prediction, right? Because for Stefanos Tsitsipas, I am not sold on the replacement for Apostolos, partially because when Stefanos initially brought Hatzinikolo on, who is the Greek Davis Cup captain, which players often do when they need a quick coach, just as sort of a temporary Band-Aid solution. And that's initially what Stefanos said it was, and now he's just still the coach. And I just think Steph needs someone with a lot of built-in authority and credibility to override a lot of the confusion and uncertainty that I think Stefanos has lived with over the last 2-3 years, along with the other influences that Steph still has in his life from a tennis standpoint. You need someone very, very strong to cut through all that. And look, I don't think Hatzinikolo is that guy, right? So that's that situation. For Runa, I wanted Lars Christensen to be his coach. I thought that was the right move for Holger. He's made that move, so now I'm feeling optimistic about that. So that's an example. Sometimes I just don't know. Sometimes I shrug my shoulders. There's a new coaching setup. I don't know if it's going to work or not, and I just ignore it, and I see what happens. Like Hubie. I mean, I like Lendl. I love Masu. Masu team, like you guys who have been listening to the show for a while will know how highly I thought of that coach-player relationship and the job that Masu did. So I love Masu, but I don't know how that's going to work out. All right, next one is from Anthony Wong. In other sports such as basketball or football, it's usually expected that players will go play in college and develop more before playing professionally. Why doesn't tennis follow a similar path to go pro? It appears that tennis players can see success on tour without first playing in college, while in other sports it's much rarer. This is actually kind of a fun one to think about because it's something you sort of take for granted. It's not, I don't think it has anything to do with the sport itself. I think it's the structure of the process that really allows tennis players to skip college. So first of all, as a junior tennis player, if you are traveling and playing tournaments, it is very easy to measure yourself up against the very best in the world. You have a major kind of international junior circuit where you can see where you stack up. And if you win a lot as a junior, we've seen that it doesn't necessarily guarantee your success as a senior, as a real pro, but it's a strong indication that if you're crushing it in the juniors, that you have at least a very good chance to be a good pro and make a living. I don't think players, at least for the American sports, I don't think high school kids have that. They don't have that competition. that ability to measure themselves up against competition, especially not in a very objective way, right? Tennis is like the most objective sport there is. It's me versus you. Either I'm going to win or you're going to win, and that's how we determine who's better. But in a sport like basketball, how good is that kid? We don't really know. They're not playing against the very best in the world. Sometimes, in some cases, maybe not even the very best in the country. And they're, maybe still growing into their body. And these things are just very hard to gauge. So you end up going to college, and now you're playing against the best. And now organizations or teams are going to be able to evaluate you and decide if they want you as a part of their organization. Are they going to draft you? Are they going to sign you? And that's another thing with tennis. You don't need somebody's approval in order to go pro. You just do it. And if you win, you go up the rankings, and congrats, now you're a pro. So, that's a key difference. You don't need to showcase your skills and impress a general manager who's then going to decide to draft you. If you want to become a pro basketball player, well, somebody needs to make you a pro basketball player. You have no power to do that on your own. And as a tennis player, you can just go do it. So I think the reason why you see a lot of players skipping the college route is because they can. By the way, the other thing I'll add, the intensive nature of tennis childhood, the fact that you now have these very intense academies and you have a lot of kids getting homeschooled. I think the development in tennis as a sport is a little bit quicker than it is in some of these other sports. I can think of some other reasons why it's a little bit different. Like, for example, in football, I think you really need to be fully mature physically, or you just can't get by. As an O-lineman, if you don't get to a certain weight, you just have no chance to be a pro. It takes time to just build and build and build up to that weight, up to that level of strength. For tennis, I guess it's a little bit less about that raw physical development, and that might play into it a little bit. But I think it's mostly about the structures in place that just give tennis players a clear path to say, okay, you're either ready or you're not. And if you have shown that you're ready, you don't need anybody's permission. Just go do it. Next one is from Caleb Walker. Hi, Gill. In your top 10 prediction video, you spoke about how many players occupy the tier 3 level, going from the world number 6 Rude to the likes of Shelton at world number 21. Previously, in the Big Four era, it was only 3 or 4 players at one time, always inside the top 10. Example, Berdych, Isner, Nishikori, Tsonga, Monfils, who we might have given tier 3 classification. Do you think this change is down to a decrease in the level of the current tier 3 and no one in that tier 3, particularly those ranked 6 through 10 consistently like Rublev and Rude, have been able to establish themselves as clearly better than those ranked 10 through 20? Or is it because more players are playing better and at what we consider a tier 3 level? I know what Caleb is trying to ask here. It can get very convoluted and almost theoretical. Just remember, when we do tiers, we're just grouping the players together. So it doesn't necessarily, there's no a tier 3 player means that they're this good. A tier 4 player means that they're this level. It never works like that. For example, let's just make a hypothetical where tier 1 would be Sinner and Alcaraz, and tier 2 would be Zverev and Djokovic, and we decide that Medvedev is clearly worse than Zverev and Djokovic, but clearly better than everybody else. Medvedev might be in tier 3 on his own, and then suddenly we're looking at that 6 through 21 range that you're referring to as tier 4. Well, now they're tier 4. Did they get worse at tennis? No, they didn't. It's just now they're tier 4 because of the way we ended up grouping the top. So tiers are always just a way to group players together. That said, you're basically asking, the fact that that group, that tier 3 currently, is so large. And by the way, here's how I think it shakes out right now. Tier 1, and this is not predictive. This is just, I think, where we're at right now. Tier 1, Sinner, Alcaraz. Tier 2, Zverev, Medvedev, Djokovic. Tier 3, everybody else. So you have a very, I guess the point that I made in my top 10 prediction is that tier 3 just feels massive right now. And part of it is vulnerability. Part of it is, I think, where the tour is at in terms of young players developing and maybe not quite being ready yet, not being there yet. And then part of it is, I'd say, the original next gen having some cracks, maybe in the, I don't want to generalize, but some of their development, like if you look at Ruud's development, Rublev's development, Tsitsipas's development, there is a world in which they would solidify themselves a little bit more as like top players. Instead, I think especially mentally, there has been a little bit of roller coaster with those guys that has been interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, look, Rune, Draper, Fils, those guys, like, they might separate themselves from this tier 3 soon. They haven't done it yet. So we'll see what happens, right? I think it's just a moment in time. I wouldn't read too much into it. Right now, it just feels like it's anyone's ball game in this group of players, as far as like who is going to ultimately end up occupying that 6 through 10 range that everybody wants to be in. And then maybe even more specifically, that 6 through 8 range that everybody wants to be in. It's just where we're at on the tour right now. From David Rogers. Hi, Gill. Can you explain what made Federer's movement so much better than most other players? And how can the average social player learn to move better like Federer? Federer's movement is fascinating because a lot of it is it's very abstract. Now, objectively, he was a great mover. But in terms of what made his movement special, I think there is some abstract nature to it, right? Like, why did it always look like Federer was gliding around the court? Which is a word that, I mean, how many times in Federer's career did people say that he's gliding? Probably a billion. But why, right? And I think it does come down to the lightness of his footsteps. If you had two people running side by side and one was making a lot of noise when their feet hit the ground and one was silent, you just couldn't hear the impact of them running, you would feel like the person who wasn't making loud stomps on the ground was running more gracefully. And Federer had that where I feel like his feet were not usually hitting the court as hard as most players hit the court. It was a lower impact way of moving. And that comes down to certain aspects of efficiency, technique, precision in the footwork, and timing and tempo. I think there's a tempo to footwork that is sometimes underlooked. And that's why I think the other thing you get, so I think you get lightness on the feet that Roger had. And I also think you got moving fast, but never looking in a rush. So it's fast without being rushed. And I think the way you achieve that is tempo, where like just the timing of how you're moving in and out of the corners is the perfect timing. Again, there's some abstract to this. The only thing I can say about how can the average social player learn to move better, I'd be a big advocate for practicing your movement without hitting the ball, with like literally shadowing your movement. So go on the baseline and move 10 times to your forehand, into your forehand corner, with your racket, swing your racket, but the ball is not there. And then recover to the middle, into the corner, recover to the middle, into the corner, recover to the middle. You can do a little bit of up and back. Obviously, don't like go to the service line, hit a shot, and then go back to the baseline. You never do that on the court. But the point is, like, simulate the way you want to move without the ball, because you need to focus on something to make it better and to hone it. And if the ball is in play, you're not focused on it. I'm sorry, you're just not. It's impossible. You can try to focus on how you're moving your feet, but ultimately, some of your attention is going to be diverted away from how you're moving your feet, and you're going to be focusing on hitting the ball, which you have to focus on the ball. So that would be my only advice. No promises that you're going to start moving like Federer. From Tafori Music. If peak Tomas Berdych was playing right now, would he fit in the top 10? He was able to beat the big three in slams. Could he do it versus Sinner and Alcaraz, perhaps on grass? Yeah, he does have a win over everyone in the big three at slams. So that's impressive. That's very impressive. But also, like, he didn't regularly beat them at slams or anywhere for that matter. He had pretty rough head-to-heads against everybody in the big three, particularly Nadal and Djokovic. And Federer, I did look it up when I read this comment. He's 6-20 against Federer, which for a guy born in 1985, it's not horrible. It's certainly decent, but it's not like Berdych was regularly challenging them or was a like big-time foil for the big three. How would he fit now? Generally speaking, I feel like the big guys, and Berdych was a big guy, they are moving way better than Berdych moved. You have a lot of guys out there, they're Berdych's height, they're good ball strikers themselves, maybe not as pure and as clean as Tomas, but they move a whole lot better than he moved. So, like, Jannik Sinner is as clean a ball striker as Berdych off of both wings with movement and defense. And that's what I think we see a lot. Like, Zverev serves better, hits a better backhand, moves better, is more tough and consistent from I think Zverev's a better player than Berdych. I don't want to just go through the list now and, like, decide if a player is better than Berdych or not, but the point is, like, I do think the game has moved forward from the Tomas Berdych meta of, you know, being a really beautiful clean ball striker off of both wings, powerful ball striker, above average serve, but not an elite serve, but he just didn't move that well. So I don't think you can really get away with that nowadays, and I think Berdych would have a similar career today than what he had in the Big Four era. I know that might sound a little bit weird because we know the Big Four era was, to date, the hardest era ever to win a major in. But I don't see him as a Sinner replacement or an Alcaraz replacement or even a Zverev or Medvedev level guy. I see him as below that as a player. So I think that he would end up similarly in the 5 through 10 range, probably closer to 10 within the top 10. Assuming you just did that droppy thing. And I guess that's what you're asking because we're close enough in time that we're just dropping him into this time period. You don't know how he would have developed as a player if he were born 10 years later. And again, like, if we did this for Bjorn Borg, well, like, Brandon Nakashima would kick Borg's ass. We know how technology works, right? So it's always hard to do this because are we just plopping Berdych in here? Because if we are, I just don't think he fares that well. I'm sorry. But is it fair to just plop him in? Not really. The answer is usually going to sound something like this. From member, hi. Hi is the username. Hi, fee, BM, whatever it is. Anyway, hi, Gill. Can you share your thoughts, or can you elaborate on your thoughts on the new meta of shorter players from your recent next-gen final MMA? Yeah, I did mention this, didn't I? So what I've been seeing from shorter players is that they are increasingly not grinders. And instead, they are very, very twitchy athletes. So both as movers and as far as accelerating the racket goes, they are extraordinarily twitchy. And that is the case with Carlos Alcaraz. That is the case with Sebastian Baez. That is the case with Tomas Berdych, who's a shorter player. I'm kind of going down the list here because Jerry Shang is actually who I was talking about, right? Jerry Shang, unbelievable. He's 5'10", 5'11" is what he's listed at. Doesn't hit the ball like 5'11", doesn't serve the ball like 5'11", because his fast twitch it's primo. It's next level. So we used to see the shorter guy a lot of the time is a grinder, right? Ferrer's going to get in tough, long rallies, winning with consistency and defense and shot tolerance. And Schwartzman is going to win with consistency and defense and shot tolerance. Now, they've always been fast. The short guys have always been fast, and that hasn't changed. That's going to remain the case. But I don't see a lot of short guys coming up now as grinders. I see them as like freakishly twitchy athletes who are actually still, as a result of that, hitting the ball pretty big. So, I mean, like one guy who is kind of more of the grinder ilk is Mute, but we see that, like, I don't know how much success Mute is ultimately, or how far Mute is ultimately going to be able to take that. Nishioka is in there. I don't know. I mean, he's pretty twitchy. He's not ultra twitchy in my estimation. By the way, it's funny. Nishioka and Mute are back-to-back in the rankings, 69 and 70. Nishioka is kind of but he's a redirector. Like he plays on his ball striking talent. He doesn't play on his toughness, his consistency, his defense. Like, I would say a real old school grinder is Roberto Carballes Baena. And to me, that's the old school short player. How to make it on tour as a 5'11" or under dude. I think Carballes Baena is the old model. And I think Jerry Shang, Sebastian Baez, that's the new model. That's how it happens now. So that's my opinion. From Joseph. Hey, Gil, just a question about the physicality of tennis compared to other sports. As someone who has watched tennis and other sports, I've always wondered how tennis stacks up against other non-contact sports. For example, is tennis more physical than a team sport like basketball? And if so, is it long-term or short-term? Thanks for all the content, weekly mailbags. You're welcome. So are you saying, well, physical is a big word. It can mean a lot of different things. It's like the umbrella word for anything athletic. Ultimately, I think tennis athletes are some of the most well-rounded athletes in the world. If you kind of go through the boxes, do you need cardio? Yes. Do you need short-term cardio? Yes. Do you need long-term cardio? Yes. Do you need strength? Yes. Do you need agility? Yes. Do you need flexibility and agility? They're siblings, but yes. Upper body and lower body? Yes, both. What am I missing here? Straight line speed, footwork, like all of it is there. So I think tennis players are super well-rounded athletes, maybe the most. There's no rests. You can't go to the bench. That's a big deal. And the wear and tear of tennis is also probably towards the top. Just how hard it is on the joints, how much it beats up your body for a non-contact sport. Now, I don't think it compares to like playing American football where you're experiencing constant collisions. Like that's a whole separate thing unto itself. I don't think it is as physically draining as like boxing or MMA or even wrestling. As far as like from a cardio standpoint, I don't think it depletes you as quickly as those things do. You can compare and contrast it to every sport, and there are other sports, there are other athletes that I think have in some ways more freakishness. Like I think a lot of football players, American football players, are stronger than tennis players. Like physically, they have more strength and muscle. Basketball players obviously have this crazy height thing to them. And it's like, whoa, you're 6'8" and you move that well? Like, you have a freakishness to you. And you can go down the list. But tennis players, where I think they really shine is the fact that you have to be a little bit of everything as an athlete. Like, you must be a balanced athlete in so many different areas. That's why I think tennis is so healthy and why it's so good for kids to play. Next one from Strider. Gill, do you ever get tennis watching fatigue? I watched the Nito ATP Finals, then after that, the Davis Cup. Then I watched the Next Gen ATP Finals. And this is all during what is considered the off-season. With the new season already underway, I find myself a little disinterested in the Australian Open tune-up tournaments. Do you ever find yourself this way, especially since you are required to watch a ton of matches for your job? Rarely. Now, I will say, do I get a little tired of watching tennis sometimes? It depends. I get tired of watching bad tennis that I need to watch sometimes. So if I need to watch something for my job and I'm just not that interested in it, or it's just not doing it for me, or if I missed it live and I have to watch it on replay, that's always a killer. That always takes away some of the enjoyment for me. Then sometimes I'll feel that, just like, oh, this is a chore. But if it's good, like if the tennis is compelling, that'll always suck me in. Even if I think I'm tired of watching tennis, if the tennis is compelling, I'll forget that I'm tired of watching tennis. Yeah, that's how I would describe it. But I also totally understand kind of the oversaturation aspect. It's a real thing. Next one is from Paul. Hi, Gil. Going into the new season, I would like to think it's more realistic for Zverev to win a slam. I would like to ask myself... No, sorry. I don't know why I can't read. Let's just start over. Hi, Gil. Going into this new season, I would like to ask if you think that it's more realistic for Zverev to win a slam or become number one. I think his game is good enough for both. Maybe from a mental perspective, it's easier for him to get to number one first. But on the other hand, getting the points of a slam win may be necessary to become number one. Thanks for all your work. Which one is more likely? Look, I think mathematically, it's more likely that he wins a slam. It just, becoming number one without a slam is mathematically difficult. So that is de facto my answer to this question. But I want to take the question and go somewhere else with it. I don't think Zverev would be ultra satisfied by becoming number one without a slam. By the way, Casper Ruud was talking about his 2022 US Open experience, and he said in a way he's thankful that he didn't become number one because it might have felt a little bit weird or not right had he become number one without winning a slam. And for Zverev, it would almost bolster, in a weird way, it would strengthen the cloud that hangs over his career right now, which is that he is the best player ever to have not won a slam. And if he becomes number one and still doesn't win one, now the argument becomes a layup. It's so easy to label him and to put him in that very specific box of Alexander Zverev was the best player to never win a slam, and I'll prove it. He became number one, and he never won one. Which I think I'd like the historians to jump in here. I know it looked like that would be Caroline Wozniacki's fate. It very much looked like that. And then she ended up getting that late Australian Open title. Late in her career, I mean. But yeah, I don't know how many people have actually done it, but I just don't know if it would satisfy or fulfill Zverev like a major title would. I really don't think so. From Beth. Hi, Gil. Do you think we will see a calendar slam in the near future? I always felt like that's the ultimate achievement in tennis. The calendar slam eluded nearly every legend of the game, including the big three. But is it any easier now, or did it get even harder for a player to get it? Also, who do you think currently has the best chance to do so? Thank you for everything you do. No, I don't think it's getting harder. I think it's getting much easier because you no longer need to reinvent yourself to win the channel double. That's why what Borg did in his days of kind of dominating the channel double was so mind-blowing. He had to play one style in Paris, a completely different style at Wimbledon, and he had to win both ways. And you simply don't need to do that anymore. Not just because of courts speeding up and slowing down, although I do think they got closer together in terms of surface speed, but also because of, in this case, grass quality, because of polyester strings, baseline tennis, the way the styles have evolved in tennis. You have a homogenization that is making it so that if you are a top flight player, this has been the case for the last 20 years. This was true about the Big Four. This is now true about Sinner and Alcaraz. If you are a top player, you are competing at all 4 slams. You are contending at all 4. So it has most definitely gotten easier to win a calendar slam. And right now, if you look at Sinner and Alcaraz, and this might change, and it could change quickly, depending on the development of a Fonseca, of a Mensik, of a Draper, of a Fils. But right now, those 2 guys are like looking across the net, and they only have one equal. So, and this has been pointed out in many different contexts, but if there's not a Big Four and there's a Big Two, what does that mean for the math? It means that everybody outside of that 2 now has a better chance of some opportunity opening up. It also means that those 2 might have a chance to do things that the 4 couldn't do because of each other. So I think the calendar slam is getting easier. Still unbelievably difficult, obviously. Goes without saying. Next one from G-Bags. Hi, Gill. Thanks for all the work you do. How would you rate the chances of Nick Kyrgios making a deep run at this year's Australian Open? I'd also love to hear your opinion on potential dark horses. I'm not going to do that yet. All right, I'm going to save that. This is funny because most of the comments on my top 10 prediction video, not most, but many comments were like, how dare you even mention Nick Kyrgios? Why would you even say his name? I wasn't considering putting him in the top 10. He was not in that group of players who I was like, I could see a case here. I'm thinking about this. No, I did not almost make Nick a top 10 player. I think there's a higher likelihood he finishes outside of the top 25 than he finishes inside the top 10. But as I said on that show, I felt he was worthy of a mention because last time we saw him play, he was at a top 10 level. Now he's back. Does it also sort of motivate me to include him in conversations like this because people have some interest in him? Sure, maybe. Like maybe I do have that internal kind of bias towards actually giving Nick the time of day. But also, I think Nick is a fascinating tennis story this year. Forget all the noise around Nick. Look, if I were a Jannik Sinner fan, I would hate Nick Kyrgios right now and deeply resent the fact that he has been dragging Jannik's name through the mud, right? But all of the Nick Kyrgios stuff aside, I think it's a fascinating tennis story. I don't rate Nick's chances of making a deep run at this year's Australian Open based on what I saw against Giovanni Pesci-Pericard. And by the way, I saw a lot of really impressive tennis. I saw a lot of moments and a lot of things in the match that made me go, oh my God, he's so gifted. How could someone who hasn't played in 2 years pull that off? How is it that every time he goes to the net, his positioning is on point, his anticipation is on point, his timing is perfect? Like a dude who doesn't have those reps should not be able to nail those fine details right away, immediately. But Nick is able to do that because he's so talented. So I thought the level was really high in a lot of different areas. But at the end of the day, you just wanted to see that Nick's wrist is up for this, and Nick's wrist is not up for this based on what we saw against GMP. So ultimately, that is ominous. That is bad news, not only for the Australian Open, but for the rest of Nick's career. Because if he needs to take off his serve, like just to see that in his first match back was really concerning. So highly concerned about Nick's wrist. Wouldn't be surprised if he pulls out of the Australian Open. And would be surprised if he made a run. Okay. 2 more. This one's from Alex. I don't think I really believe this, but it has been rattling around in my head. Is it possible that Sinner's illnesses actually helped him last year? We hear a lot about how taxing the tour calendar is, so I could imagine taking a week off here and there with what seemed like fairly minor illnesses for the most part might help with staying fresh for the whole season. While it certainly hurts rankings points and other counting stats, in the context of rate stats, among which is his 90% win rate, not playing is actually a prudent choice versus going out there and losing if he's not at his best. Okay, a couple things. One of the illnesses was not mild. The one before Roland Garros had him in bed. I think he said, like, in bed, no physical activity for like 10 days. So that is never going to be helpful. That is going to set your fitness back in a big way. And I think we saw that in the semifinal, ultimately against Alcaraz. That said, if you look at the players who, as far as the Olympics is concerned, where he had the tonsillitis thing, yeah, you could make an argument. If you just look at the results of players who played in the Olympics, players who didn't, and it's hard to measure this because you have to say, okay, what were your expectations going in to the North American hardcourt swing and the U.S. Open and all of that, and how did they do compared to those expectations? It's never going to be a scientific thing, but Sabalenka didn't play the Olympics, won the U.S. Open, had an incredible North American hardcourt summer. Sinner didn't play the Olympics, won the U.S. Open. Big stuff. You know, Cincinnati U.S. Open swept it, just like Aryna did. And then there are your Alcaraz examples of the world where the Olympics messed him up. Like, he wasn't really ready to go play more tennis after the Olympics. Look who won Canada. Rublev won Canada. He didn't play the Olympics. Sorry, Popyrin won Canada. I don't know what that was. Rublev made the final. He didn't play the Olympics. So I think you saw a good amount of that. Last one. From Tennis History and Results DB database. Do you think slams shall add a third place match to their schedule? The argument against it are as follows. 1, the players are overplaying. The calendar is too long as is. They need more rest. 2, after the lost semis, the players may lose interest and the matches may be subpar. The arguments for it. 1, the third place match does not extend the calendar all that much. The players are already there and it does not involve additional travel. 2, this will be a high-stakes match. If the proper amount of points will be given to the winner, I reckon points shall only be slightly less than for the losing finalist. 3, with 1 or 2 dominant players, other very good players do not have a lot of chances to meet in slams. I'm going to just edit for brevity. And 4, now, for some players, reaching semis at a slam is their career highlight, but with winning such a match, it can be elevated to even more, creating additional degree of success. Hopefully, such a match may get a vibe similar to the Olympics bronze medal match. Doesn't interest me. Doesn't interest me. I don't like the idea of another match having to be played in the final weekend of a slam. I want all of the attention, all of the build, the anticipation, the energy. I want it to all be funneled into the slam finals after the semis. 100%. I don't want another match. I don't have an appetite for it. I don't want it to take away at all. I don't want to have to for fans to pay any attention to it. Now, It's a dangerous thing for you to bring up because it's another opportunity to make more money. It's another thing to sell. I don't think the players would go for it, to be honest. But we've seen in so many sports like college football, the trend is expand, 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 more, more, more. Tennis does not need more. There is so much already, as you mentioned. The other thing I'll say is you said the players may lose interest. This would depend on the player, right? Like at the U.S. Open last year, if Draper and Tiafoe played a third place match, okay, like they might be interested in that kind of thing. But let's go to the Australian Open, right? Would Zverev and Djokovic, sorry, it wasn't Zverev and Djokovic. Oh, yes, it was. It was Zverev and Djokovic. Would Zverev and Djokovic, you see, I'm very tired, you can tell. Would Zverev and Djokovic want to play a third place match? No. Not a chance. They would not be interested in such a thing. So neither would I. But interesting thought. I love it. Only in the mailbag do you get these kind of ideas. That'll do it. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.